Hello and welcome to John and Letty's podcast. We are so excited because we're continuing with our marriage workshop. And today we have a topic that everybody that's married and even people that are not married can identify with and maybe learn something or get some pointers.
Yes. It's about how to handle disagreement in marriage. Now, this is obviously a very important issue because, believe it or not, even in the best kinds of marriages, there are always disagreements, arguments, or what we could call fights.
Yes.
And even there are certain rules that we need to keep in mind in order to be able to understand that while we can have disagreements, we have to have a way to solve the disagreements and, in a sense, let's say fight fair or do things that will not cause injury or damage to the marriage itself. We shouldn't have one little battle kind of destroy your whole marriage.
Right.
So if we need to understand that, yes, at times there's going to be fights and things like that, but if we handle it correctly, our marriage will not only survive, but it can actually even get stronger.
Yes, and actually, if we take advantage of these disagreements in marriage, it could really bring resolutions to some things that bother us or things that, we want our spouse to change, that maybe the person hasn't noticed, that it could be something small, it could be something more important, but being able to fight in a good way and bring resolution is a very good thing for the marriage.
Yes. And again, we're kind of giving tools because unfortunately, it's going to happen.
Yes.
So we just need to know how to handle it correctly. So, for example, what are some of the things that happen when people have a fight or things that we should avoid and not do when there is a fight?
Well, one of the things, and we talked about this before in another podcast, is when you are having an argument with your spouse or when you're upset about something or angry about something, the silent treatment, going silent and just having this hurt or being upset inside and not, talking to your spouse about it. And being silent does not solve anything.
Right. And we mentioned this in another podcast, and a lot of these are similar because in the other podcast, we were talking about things that cause deep hurts in a marriage.
Yes.
So the overarching theme is not to do something that would cause a deep hurt in your spouse, which will then damage the marriage. And obviously, when we do things like not speaking to the spouse, and what happens is that the problem doesn't get resolved, and we just get even more upset at the fact that maybe the spouse hasn't realized that we are upset at something. So usually the reason that we try not to use the silent treatment is because it won't solve anything.
Right.
It just prolongs the suffering, or it makes it worse despite the fact that it's being silent.
Yes, and one of the other things that we've learned, because we've been married for 35 years, and we have disagreements, and we have learned how to fight our battles and maybe even choose our battles. There's some things that are not worth it. You can just communicate and get it done with. But not only the silent treatment, but the not crossing a line of disrespect. That's important when trying to resolve a situation between the spouses. There should be a line of respect that it should never be crossed.
Yes, that's like foul play. The moment that you start so we have a penalty flag. Somebody goes ahead and then starts to disrespect the other person. Again, that's the moment that things are going the wrong way.
Right.
It's only going to escalate the situation. And usually when someone gets disrespected, what they want to do next is then disrespect back.
Right.
Basically, what happens is that the fight goes, what you do, then the other person does. And then what the other person does, the other person does. And so if someone who is not more mature knows what to do or is willing to do what is needed to do, then the situation just escalates.
And when a situation escalates, could lead to even more dangerous things like from disrespect to violence and other things that are not going to solve the situation, are going to make things even worse. And when it
Correct.
gets to that, it's beyond just resolving an argument. It becomes something more serious in the relationship.
Correct. So a fourth thing that we should not do in a fight is to resort to any kind of violence. And this is again another penalty. This is something that causes great problems in a marriage. And when things are at that stage, it's at a pretty bad stage. And usually people need help in order to try to resolve situations when they have allowed things to go to that level of damage, because there's a damage that happens in the marriage when things get into physical violence. Obviously, this is completely non-biblical. Even with other people, you should not resort to violence. How much more should you not resort to violence when it's dealing with the person you have a covenant for life with?
And we know that when things escalate, and this is something that we have taught for many years, when things start to escalate to the point of violence, at that point there's a need to put distance between the spouses until things cool off, or they get help, or things get resolved. But it's not good to stay and let that escalate to that point.
Correct.
It's better to just walk away and cool off.
Correct. And then go and when their cooler heads prevail, at that moment, then go ahead and try to address the issue that caused the problem to come with a resolution.
But like you were saying, this is talking about things that are way, more the word that I'm trying to find is a more serious situation in the marriage. But we're talking today more about resolving disagreements.
Correct.
That, could be dealt with. And in the past, we talked about learning to communicate at a deeper level with your spouse. And this is one of the key steps that we can take if we want to get to a resolution when there's a disagreement. If we learn to communicate with the other person. And when that is happening in a marriage, for example, if it's me, and this has happened in our marriage, that we want to communicate something, something that's bothering me, a disagreement that we're having, I know that I can talk to you and tell you, look, I'm upset because of this and that, or I don't agree with this and that, and that I know that this is a safe place that I can go, that my husband, you, are not going to go and fly off the handle and walk away or get angrier because we have learned how to communicate and that to solve the problems.
So let's say that somebody already had the situation. They already said, you know what, we messed up, we fought, and we didn't do it well. Well, this is a process of learning.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that if you already did it wrong, there are things you can do to try to right these wrongs as you then start to apply these principles or rules to help you really communicate even when there's a disagreement. So one of these is that, first of all, we have to recognize what is our responsibility in the fight, or what did we do that was wrong, unfair, we shouldn't have done at that moment. And after we recognize it, then it's time to go and ask forgiveness. In other words, a person has to repent.
Yeah.
And repenting means to make a firm decision that you're not going to do this again. It's not just to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And communicate that to your spouse.
And the spouse on the receiving end should be able to forgive and move forward. And not trying to always win the argument. That's actually another key thing. You don't always have to win the argument. Sometimes it's best to allow the other person to tell you your feeling, how they're feeling, and what's going on inside of them. And maybe you haven't even done anything wrong. But if your spouse feels a certain way, then we have to take that responsibility and ask for forgiveness also. And always both of them being willing to forgive.
Yes, but now you're talking about a characteristic which is called maturity, which means that you have to be humble, because at that point, if there's pride, you know that it's not going to be able to be resolved because the pride gets in the way. And also there has to be this willingness to ask forgiveness, this willingness to repair the situation and to approach it, communicate with respect, and what we could say is even giving up your rights at times.
Right.
And sometimes you might be right about something, but it's better to fix the situation. Of course, we're not talking about things that have to do with sin or anything like that. We're just talking about a disagreement.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and sometimes, the fight and the resolution is worth it for the good of the marriage and the relationship. So we don't always have to win. We always should take responsibility for our part, whatever it was. We should always forgive. And when we forgive, you don't want to bring other things that happen, things in the past or things like that, is not the time. You want to get to a resolution of what you're talking about right now and move forward in the relationship.
Right. So just by applying these simple things that we can do and apply right now, we can learn how to have a stronger marriage. And we can learn that even when we have disagreements, we can make things work. And in fact, the best thing we could do is when something starts to escalate is to de-escalate it.
Yeah.
And one way to do it is in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1, it says that a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Mm-hmm. When sometimes somebody is coming upset, almost like looking for a fight, what the Bible is saying is that if you respond in that same level of harshness or another level of harshness, you're going to escalate the situation. So there's times that using wisdom and using a softer answer or a better way of answering, then it will turn away the wrath and it will diffuse and de-escalate the situation so that it could be resolved easier.
Yes, and it is worth it to diffuse the situation, to be able to talk about then the situation. As long as there's a hot fuse going on, it's going to be very, very hard to talk about what the disagreement is. And that's why it's not a good idea also to just run away. We're talking, separate if there is a violence, but if it's not violence or anything like that, don't walk away from the situation. Stay, resolve it with your spouse and move forward. That brings that resolution, which strengthens the marriage, strengthens the relationship, brings more trust between the spouses instead of running away. A lot of people tend to run away, don't want to deal with the situation, and that's not the point. The point is to stay, fight. Instead of fighting with each other, fight for each other, I think.
And fight for the marriage.
Yeah, fight for the marriage.
And work it out.
Yep.
So thank you so much for watching this podcast today. Again, if you know someone who might need help in this area, go ahead and let them know. You can go ahead and subscribe, send it to other people as we continue this series on the Marriage Workshop.